Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Artz, and I'm the co-editor of Dealing with Disasters, GIS for Emergency Management, which is the second book in the Applying GIS series. I'm also a content strategist for Esri Press, and today I'm talking to my co-editor of this book, Ryan Lanclos. Ryan is the Director of Public Safety Solutions at Esri and serves as Esri's subject matter expert on GIS for emergency management and humanitarian response. He also leads Esri's Disaster Response Program, or DRP. If you're not familiar with that, the DRP provides 24/7 GIS support to organizations during disasters. So welcome, Ryan.
Hey, thanks, Matt. It's good to be with you.
Good to be with you. I thought we could start by you telling your GIS story. What first drew you into GIS?
Yeah, it's a good maybe place to start and frame it. I think like many of us that got into GIS, some of those decisions we maybe made were deliberate, and other things were just opportunistic. And for me, the my first foray into GIS was as an undergraduate. I was doing a research project over a summer. We were doing hand mapping of some USGS quad map updates as a geologist, and kept thinking there has to be a better way to do this than just me using a pencil and a ruler and sketching by hand. And so I started asking questions of my professor and others, and found my way to my first GIS course, and then did an internship, and then moved on into geography for graduate studies. And for me, a lot of questions I get is, well, how did you get into emergency management, and how did you start to really focus on crisis response? And for me, after 9/11 in the United States, a lot of money was coming into government supporting what was then Homeland Security, that really transitioned into what we know today as emergency management as a parallel field. And at that time, I was doing quite a bit of work. There were questions around how we could get better information, using data for situational awareness. And so I started working at the governor's office, supporting that advisory council around all things GIS, and leading our efforts at a state level to really get a shared situational awareness so that the governor and the director had purview of what was happening should we have a flood or a tornado. Which led me to then, actually 10 years ago this year, which was the Joplin tornado that struck just south of where we were living in Kansas City at the time, working for Esri. And we were able to respond in with a team of people under the disaster response program to help them with damage assessment. And it really was kind of my turning point in the career to say I could invest much more time and effort to help, standardize processes to help organizations respond to crises of all types, and really led me to where I am today within Esri, as you described, kind of leading our disaster response efforts and truly emergency management globally. So, kind of an interesting pathway to get where I am today, and lots of steps along the way to get to it. Again, I think like many of those maybe listening today, they're wondering, do I take training? Is it formal training? Do I just get started? I would say, be an inquisitive GISer and have a passion for doing good, and that's what led me into emergency management.
Yeah. So in the book, when we first started, we identified maybe
Yeah.
40 or 50 different case studies, which was pretty amazing. And we had to narrow it down to about a dozen or so to include in the book. Can you share with our audience one of those case studies that you think is particularly powerful?
Oh man, Matt, you're gonna put me on the spot, like choosing our favorite child, right? Out of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
list. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. I think it's funny that you did a great job of saying we had so many great examples that are out there. I would reflect on two I think that are really useful because they cover several different hazard types of flooding incident as well as hurricane preparedness. That was the one we focused on with Hurricane Florence, and really looking at New Bern, North Carolina, a town of 30,000 people that was able to deploy a GIS to support a transition from a paper-based process that they learned didn't scale very well for damage assessments in previous events, and that they need to do a better job to be ready for the next event, in this case, Hurricane Florence that came through. And with that technology, we talk about how they were able to support 300 water evacuations and document $100 million of losses to both residential and commercial properties in New Bern, North Carolina. Like, I really appreciate that because it's a very small, dedicated staff, a community of 30,000 that truly made a difference in real, tangible ways for that community using GIS. There's a lot of other great examples in the book that we point out that I think that people will resonate with. Again, those that live on the Gulf Coast, it's hurricane season as we get into the summer part of the year, looking at Key West and how they were able to document not only the damage assessment, but also looking at debris, like immediately transitioning their team to focus on debris management, clearing roads, in fact, documenting 10,000 downed trees in that community, and be able to move to that complete process with a mobile toolkit. Just some really good examples. I really like those because I think sometimes people expect that organizations, have to be a certain size or a certain geography to do well in emergencies. And I
Yeah,
think it again shows the power of WebGIS and what these organizations have done.
yeah. When disasters happen, emergency management professionals, they spring into action quickly, and disaster response, it's all very visible. It's like the public face. I like to think of it, the public face of emergency management. Um, can you talk about an example of a disaster response where it was handled well or improved thanks to the use of GIS?
Yeah, absolutely. In the book, I think, as I mentioned, you'll see kind of global footprint examples from all around the world. Maybe one that I'll reference that's outside of the book, even just as a common reference point for everybody else to see what it looks like to do well with GIS, was looking back to Beirut and the port explosion that happened in 2020, where we saw both the local community, led by the Lebanese Red Cross, providing disaster support services, collecting information about needs of the community, what individual needs existed, where damage existed, but also then the surge of volunteers coming in, both from the United Nations and the International Search and Rescue Group that came in to support the search and rescue operations, all using a common information sharing platform based on GIS that allowed them to communicate directly with the citizens and the residents, but also with those other partner agencies to really make a difference. We saw the number of teams deploying, being able to work remote, in the middle of a pandemic, still being able to connect to each other no matter where they existed in the world, and this global response to a crisis. I really like that example and the fact that it allowed each person to kind of contribute in their own way to that response effort and to quickly move, beyond that response into recovery. It's a really nice example, I think, of collaboration and information sharing, using those tools that many of us know every day and applying it directly into to support that community.
Yeah, that is a really great example.
Yeah.
So you've been working in this area for quite some time, as you told us previously, and you've seen a lot of things. When we worked on this book together, did anything surprise you other than maybe the vast number of
Yeah.
case studies that we came up with?
Yeah, well, I think we both were surprised, like this massive amount of research and availability of case studies that were out there. I think what surprised me, if we look back and then when you read the book, you'll see these examples come forth, is that, traditionally, I think when we look at response, a lot of people think they have to be a professional emergency manager, like certified emergency manager and do that business. But really what we tell the story about in here is the collaboration between the GIS professionals and those certified emergency managers who are trying to make operational decisions. And so I guess my biggest surprise is that a lot of people that we talk about are non-traditional emergency managers. They are working in cities and counties doing GIS for everything from managing land records and street center lines and addresses, but were called upon and kind of got thrust into this operating environment as a result of a crisis or a disaster and stepped up to use the toolkit that we know well as GIS professionals to help solve really complex challenges. I was surprised at the number of people that had that kind of background that had maybe never been through it before, but stepped into the moment and took over and were really able to help those emergency managers respond.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really interesting observation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are a lot of different GIS tools available for
Mm.
emergency management
Yeah.
professionals, as you pointed out, the GIS people to use. Uh, what's an easy way for them to get started?
Yeah, I think it can be overwhelming sometimes to think, if you're back to what we just talked about, if we were an individual working in a city or a county or an organization that's never been through a disaster response before, like where do I even get started? Like how can I help with preparedness efforts or even recovery longer term when you maybe get the phone call? In the book, in each one of the chapters, for each phase of the crisis cycle, if you will, we give some tips and tricks, like where to start the process, looking at what data you may need to have on hand, common workflows that each phase of that disaster will take you through. And so that you can start there, do an assessment on your own to kind of look at where your capabilities exist today and where you might want to go next to really build kind of local resilience to be ready to answer the phone call when it comes in. And for those that are looking to take the next step, we have a lot of solutions that are available at Esri. One of the most, you said it kind of the earlier in your questions, one of the most pressing areas that we get thrust to is response. It's on the news every day when the fire hits or the earthquake or the flood. And so we have a series of solutions really focus on disaster response operations that allow people to really solve common challenges that we see in the book. How do we maintain real-time situation awareness? How do we understand potential impact and conduct damage assessments? and how do we manage the flow of public information so that we're communicating well to help those that need it the most. So I think if you combine what we show in the book as a kind of a workbook aspect of it, learn some of the case studies and apply and look for that on your own as a way to kind of do a self-assessment, you have a great place to start.
Oh, that's great. So if you wanted our readers to take away one thing from reading this book, what would that be?
Well, maybe to think about what's version 2 going to look like, right? So how do they contribute and become the next star that maybe talks about the case study? But I would say if one thing to take away from this book would be that you as an individual, right, no matter what type of organization you're in, no matter what size of organization you're in, and no matter where in the world you sit, can make a real difference. If you have a vision for how GIS can help solve difficult challenges, if you have the passion to be able to put together the right tools and understand the workflows of those you serve and work with every day, you can really make a difference. I mean, we talked at the beginning about how this book really highlights organizations of all types and sizes responding to all types of hazards and crises. And so I would say, there's no better time than now to go and visit as a GS professional, go sit down with your emergency manager and your organization, get to know them, talk about some of the challenges that keep them up at night, and reference back and share that book with them as case studies and examples of how other people are solving some of the same challenges that you're likely to hear in that conversation. I think we can do so much more if we just start now and have that conversation to get prepared for the next crisis.
Yeah. All right, Ryan. Well, thanks for taking a few minutes to talk about the book.
You're welcome. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, and so Dealing with Disasters, GIS for Emergency Management, it's available now through most online retailers as a print book and as an ebook. So thanks, Ryan, and we look forward to seeing more from you and your team.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks.